Hello, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be hearing from Elizabeth Henderson of the Granted Garden Club, who will speak about the importance and beauty of native perennial flowers and how to choose the best ones for your garden. Elizabeth is a club member, a retired librarian, and was a 20-year member of the Virginia Native Plant Society. She was also a volunteer at the Dorothy Bliss Memorial Native Plant Botanical Garden in Western Virginia, where Elizabeth has many years of knowledge and experience to share with us. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So, importance and beauty of native perennials and what you might think about growing in your yard. Why is it good to include native perennials and annuals in our gardens? Just a quick review of these important points. They provide the most breeding and young bearing places in our landscapes. The native plants support a biomass, generally the insects that provide food for the birds, that are 4 times that found on alien plant species in an area the same size, according to preliminary studies done by Doug Talame and his students at the University of Delaware. So think about this. If you have eliminated that percentage of food for the birds that evolved in this area, you will end up with at least 4 times fewer native bird species. And we are seeing this beginning to show declining numbers of some of the native birds. This will not be a comprehensive listing of all the native flowers available in our area. The photographs I'm using were mostly taken at the Dorothy Bliss Native Plant Botanical Garden in Virginia. And because of that, I can imagine that many of you will be thinking, well, they aren't suitable to our Connecticut environment. But let me reassure you that where our botanical garden was along the Blue Ridge Mountains in West Central Virginia, that area is in the same basic agricultural zone, Zone 7, that is our zone here in the shoreline region. And I will present my suggestions of growing possibilities by the type of plant structure and use through the calendar of the growing seasons. Because of the increased interest in conservation and the value of native plants, it has gotten easier to find native species in many nurseries, local and online. But what do we want to look for when we buy? Native plants have often gotten a bad name for not making a big, showy, colorful presence in our gardens. If we look at plants available and make some slight adjustments to our gardening plans, we will find that they make a good substitute to the non-native plants. And I have heard it said that you need lots of sun to grow natives, and that's not so. Many of the natives have evolved as understory plants in the wild, so they prefer shade to full shade conditions. I'm going to start with ground covers. One, because they can form the foundation. Next, sorry. Okay, this is a view of the Botanical Garden in Virginia. We were given some space on one of the local colleges. It's a very steep slope, and we'll come back to some of those features. So I'm starting with ground covers. One, because they can form the foundation for a native flower garden. And also ground covers can help to improve the structure of the soil and provide overwintering places for the next year's bees and other native pollinators. If you have specimen trees in your lawn where the grass is mowed right up to the tree trunk, you probably have fairly densely packed soil, which will not provide the native bees and other overwintering pollinators. Now, admittedly, some of these flowers are not going to knock the socks off of people driving by your house, but that brings me to one of the most admirable traits of growing native plants. They can encourage you to stop and look at what is growing in your garden. Learn to appreciate the subtle nuances of change in the garden week by week. We need to slow down to get the full benefits from our gardens. Now, to specific ground covers. Next. Allegheny pachysandra is one of the first bloomers in the spring with these delightfully weird white flower stalks. But they don't bloom very long. The blooms fade fairly quickly. Their charm is mostly in their leaf patterns, chains of silvery gray leaf outlines that will last year round. And they are so slow spreading, so they are easy to maintain. You can see they're very small, grow 6 to 8 inches, and they bloom from March to May. The leaves are evergreen and they will last the whole season. Next. Another good ground cover is green and gold with bright yellow daisy-like flowers with a fairly dense blanket of bright green leaves that will last all season. Look for them beginning in April through June. In this picture, unfortunately, it was the best picture I had of green and gold. The white flowers in the front are shooting star, which it is an accent plant. It's not a ground cover. The green and gold are those little yellow daisy-like flowers that are held on stalks just above the leaf cover. Next. Now, this is wild ginger, which is very low growing, 6 to 12 inches. It likes rich woods, but it will tolerate dry conditions, and it flowers from April to May. We're not seeing any of the flowers here because the flowers are tucked under the leaves and grow right along the ground, and they're actually not particularly pretty. The wild ginger is grown for those attractive heart-shaped leaves, and they last throughout the garden season. They're easy to start. They're easy to transplant. They spread slowly. And it's attractive heart-shaped leaves are their main attraction. While we are in the plants that like woodland conditions, consider some early season flowers that can provide contrast and a point of attention for your understory ground cover. Next. Wake robin is a trillium, and it's one of my favorites. Look for them to start blooming in April and May. One of the most attractive things about wake robin is that the flowers are held quite a ways above the leaf cover. And it has this graceful stalk, and then the flower comes out at 90 degrees, and it will show all through its season. It's an attractive color. It's a small plant, but it makes a good impact. Most of the trilliums have white flowers, and they point upwards and they sit right on top of the leaf clusters, and they don't show up as well. Wake robin is one of the things when I see it blooming, I get, okay, it's gonna be spring. Next. Now, this is not a ground cover, but it provides a lot of interest. It's very reliable. Virginia bluebells. Now, just a word about the Latin names. You'll see a lot of the plants that we're going to be looking at, the species name, which is written in all lowercase. In many cases, you're going to see something like this, Virginiana or Virginium. These are not, Virginia plants. But the Virginia colony was one of the first settled by the British, and they brought botanists to catalog what new plants were growing that they had never seen. So a lot of that, the species name, the second part of the Latin name, simply refers to the fact that that's where it was first discovered. One of the things that I like about Virginia bluebells is the flower buds start out this pale pink, and then when they open, they turn this lovely little sky blue color. They form clumps. They will slowly spread. They like shade to partial shade, provide you some color in a growing zone that you might not expect to see these pretty flowers. The clumps will get larger over time. Next. Now this is one that I had to include. This is one of my favorite native plants, the trout lily. It's a small plant. It grows 4 to 10 inches tall, and it will bloom from March to May, and it likes a dry to moist woods type environment. With its graceful reflex petals, arching stems, and mottled basal leaves, it will provide a lovely point of interest. Next, wood betony, or its other common name, which I love, lousewort. It grows in the understory shade. It's fairly low growing. It will be along the border. 5 to 14 inches. It blooms April to June. Now, each one of those little tubes that you see are individual flowers. When you look at it from directly above, they look like a pinwheel, and they are a favorite of early season bumblebees. Their leaves have a rather ferny-like appearance. They do well in dry soil and on banks. Their bloom time is usually April to June. Next, columbine, one of my favorites. It blooms 1 to 2 feet and blooms from April to July. It likes partial to full shade. One of the things I like best about it is the red flowers are held on graceful stalks above the foliage, so it will show from a distance. Now, this is one that has been heavily hybridized. This is the native columbine. In the nurseries, you will see columbines in all shades, pink, purples. And it brings up a question that has not yet been settled, whether those hybrid varieties provide the food sources for the pollinator larvae. So I opt on the side. I have read arguments in both directions, but I try to opt on the side of growing the original natives just to be on the safe side. Next, another one of my favorites, dwarf crested iris, which grows, it's a very low grower. It only grows 3 inches to 6 inches. And it's particularly good along stone pathways. Its bloom is from April to May. It propagates via rhizomes, but it spreads slowly, so it's not going to take over. It is a true iris. It has typical iris, nice clean green leaves, and then the typical iris, 2 layers of three petals on each layer. It spreads via rhizomes, but it spreads slowly, so you can keep it under control. And now before we move on to the summer flowers, here's something to think about. Do you have a sloping hillside or even a steep incline? I've noticed with our lovely rock, large rocks, that I frequently see houses where the driveway the driveway goes up through a it's been cut into a stone, and so you have a steep incline, which it's hard to get stuff to grow on. If you plant those areas with native flowers, some of the smaller ones, it will give you curb appeal because the lower heights of many of the natives. So you can stack them up the hillside to show them up so they can be, you get a good view of them. Now, for the May to June, July season, we have a lot to choose from. Next. If you're looking for a high impact, long blooming perennial with low water requirements and amazing diversity, penstemon are beard's tongue. This one is called graybeard. This is a top contender. In the early summer, right after your spring bloomers have faded, they can fill the garden with spires of foxglove-like flowers, very delicate. You may get paler pinks, a little rosier. They have hybridized among themselves, but I think they're one that will do well. You do want to deadhead them for continuous bloom. Next, Stokes aster. This is a delightful plant. It's an evergreen perennial that typically grows to 1 to 2 feet tall. Each plant can have several flower heads that are 3 to 4 inches across, with these deeply divided blue rays that give them this kind of feathery look. This species readily self-sows and adapts to many conditions, and it does thrive in rather dry soil. You want to deadhead them for continuous bloom through the summer. And this is a big favorite of the early bumblebees. When I was looking through my photographs, I'm trying to find a good picture here of the Stokes aster, I found none of the pictures of the Stokes. There wasn't a bumblebee on one of the flowers. They're a big favorite for the bees. Next, this is Blue Star. And the flowers are pretty. They're rather small. The flowers don't last long. So its main use is a low background shrub, as the foliage stays green during the summer and even through droughts. Then in the fall, the leaves will turn a bright golden yellow, and they hold their leaves. You don't get leaf drop with them. So they provide good interest and a good background. It likes sun to partial shade, so it's not picky about its growing conditions. Next. This is spiderwort. And this does do well in the wild. It grows in sun to shade. It grows 2 feet tall, blooms from April to August. It can be a bit aggressive self-seeder. In the botanical garden, every year we'd find a couple of new clumps of it coming up where we hadn't planted it. But it forms a clump. That clump doesn't spread much. The thing that I like is this, yes, the upright foliage and it's clean. It does not get shaggy. It can grow up to 3 feet. And the one thing that you have to watch out for with spiderwort is that you don't confuse it with the Asian dayflower. The Asian dayflower has a similar flower, but it only has 2 petals instead of the 3 that you see here in spiderwort. The other thing about dayflower is it has a weak stem. It tends to trail along the ground. And because it's one of the first things that blooms in the spring, it's like, oh, this pretty little thing, and it's starting to, we're getting spring. But because it's got a weak stem, it grows along the ground. And if you leave it, it self-seeds very vigorously, and it will cover up everything else that's growing in that area. It can be a real problem. So I always pull it out as soon as I see one. Next. Now, this might seem an unusual plant to include in your garden, mountain mint. It has white flowers in the upper leaves, which are dusted in white. It's not spectacular in and of itself. The thing that it's useful for in your garden, it's a good companion plant to soften the transition from one brightly colored plant to another, or to use it as a backdrop to set off lower growing plants in front. And you can see this is what we did in the botanical garden. We have this, it's up against, I think this is up against one of the brick buildings that borders the botanical garden, and the bright flowers of the plants that we had growing the color was lost in the bright brick color. So by putting the mountain mint in the background, and it grows 1 to 2.5 feet tall. It grows in sun, likes partial shade. It blooms July to September. It's a very, very popular plant with the butterflies. And it provides this good backdrop to set off the lower growing plants in front. Next, obedient plant. Again, this is kind of a favorite of mine. It's a member of the mint family. It grows 1 to 4 feet tall. The flower stalk is 1 to 4 feet tall from April to July. Partial shade. We had it growing in fairly dry soil, and I found it did better there than in the damper soils down at the bottom of our hill. The thing that's fun about this, and it's a good one to show kids, is the flowers come off at 90 degrees. Each individual flower comes off the stalk at 90 degrees from the one before it. And if you take your finger and push the flower over, like you can see we've done there in the center, it stays. It doesn't come back. It doesn't flop back. Hence, it's called obedient plant. And I think the next slide should be, yes, a view of the bank covered with obedient plants in early summer, late spring to early summer. It provides an interesting visual effect in the garden. Next, one of my favorites, great lobelia. It likes full sun to partial shade. It grows, the flower stalk is 1 to 2 feet tall. It blooms July to September. It does prefer slightly damp soil, although I have had it growing in my garden at home in Virginia where it was fairly dry, and it did just fine. It's one of the bluest of of in the flowers that you have. Now the flowers are rather small, but the stalks, and they hold their position for a long time. Now, as I said, I found it to be tolerant of slightly drier soils than this next flower. Next, Lobelia cardinalis, the cardinal flower. Now, this is, I say, it's a relative of the great lobelia, but the brilliant red flowers on the flower stalk really makes a big effect. The flower stalk can grow 2 to 4 feet, and the blooms are from July to September. It will grow in partial shade. It tolerates some sun. You can see the individual flowers are quite a bit larger than the great lobelia, and it really is very eye-catching. It does like damp soil. The roots must not be allowed to dry out. So if you have a stream or a pond, or just a place that the rainwater collects and it tends to stay damp, this is a good place to put cardinal flower. Next. Okay, the next 2 flowers that we're going to look at are one where, although I haven't been focusing on the Latin names, this is one that you want to remember at least that species names. They're both Monardas. This one is bee balm, and the species name is Didyma. And you can see in the second photograph there how we've got it growing up the hillside, huge clump. It flowers from June to October, so it gives you some bright colors in the garden when other things are dying out. It will tolerate damp soil, but we had it growing on the hillside, and that was fairly dry. Next, so its cousin, Monarda fistula, and here it's being called bergamot. Now in the catalogs I have seen, this has the similar flower, but it's pale lilac. I've seen it as bee balm, and I've seen bee balm listed as bergamot. So it's one that you want to, if you want the red one, you want to be sure you get Didyma, and a good nursery will give you the Latin names. The fistula is, I say, it's the lilac. It's a more delicate looking flower, very popular with the butterflies. It will grow in dry soil. It likes some sun, and the flower heads are held about 2 to 3 feet. Okay, next. Here's our old friend butterfly weed. I'm sure most people are familiar with this native plant because it is the favorite of the monarch butterfly. It likes fields or dry soil. It likes full sun. Now it is low growing. It will come up and then it will spread horizontally 1 to 2 feet above the ground. So it's something you want to put, towards the edge of your beds. There are a lot of milkweeds out there in the nurseries that are not the ones that support the monarch larvae. Other 2, which are much taller, that are favorites of the monarch caterpillars, are common milkweed, which grows 3 to 5 feet. The flowers appear in round pink balls that have an intense sweet aroma. It would be a good one to plant next to a deck, a low deck, where the scent will just overpower you. There's another one if you have, now that one likes dry soil. If you have wet soil, There's a swamp milkweed, which grows 2 to 4 feet, and it blooms June to August. And again, it's another one that is, yes, definitely favorite of the monarch butterfly. You'll see other species of Asclepias in the nurseries, but you want to stick with these 3 if you're wanting to support the native pollinators. Next, purple coneflower. This is one of the most common native flowers in nurseries. Now, this is another one that has been highly hybridized, which brings that issue about where there's not universal agreement. Do the hybrids supply the same growth factors as the original natives? I have seen arguments on both sides. Again, it's just take the safe way and plant the original native. They have a delightful honey scent aroma when they're in full bloom. And that kind of orange cone there are the mature flowers, individual flowers. And you see we've got a little butterfly on it. It likes full sun. It will grow in dry soil. It's a very reliable. It comes back. Mine are coming up now. And they grow 2 to 3 feet. So they're going to be a little towards the back of the flower beds. Big favorite of the bees and the butterflies. Okay, next. Black-eyed Susans. One of the most popular wildflowers grown in gardens. It's very easy to establish. The bright yellow 2 to 3 inch wide daisy-like flowers bloom from June through September. So it gives you some color towards the end of the season. And also provides nectar and pollen towards the end of the season. It spreads via rhizomes and it does self-seed a bit, but I haven't found it to be aggressive. The most common height is listed as 18 inches, but some varieties can grow higher. And notice that the petals are long and rather graceful. And the thing that you want, you'll see, is that it has a very open appearance. Compare it to its cousin, which comes up next. Thin leaf coneflower. Now, this is not a coneflower. This is in the same genus as black-eyed Susans, Rudbeckia, and it's often mistaken for black-eyed Susans. This is a smaller plant. The flowers have shorter petals. They require full sun, and it is very easy to grow. It does okay in drier areas. It will tolerate damp areas as well. The plant shape is a typical dome-shaped bush. This species usually has smaller flower heads, but more flower heads per plant, and the growth factor is much denser. It blooms from August to October. Nice cheery color towards the end of the growing season. Next, turtlehead. I had to include this one. It's a clump-forming perennial plant that blooms in the fall with these hooded flowers that look similar to snapdragon blooms. The thing that I find interesting is here we've got 2 open. The most I've ever seen open at one time are 4 of these turtley head-looking flowers. It likes full sun or partial shade. It does like a fairly rich soil, blooming July to September. A fun little plant. Okay, next. Another odd flower shape, closed gentian. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall. It blooms August to October. It's one of the bluest flowers available. And the flowers clustered at the top of the plant are bottle-shaped with closed mouths. So the petals wrap around each other. They're not fused together. And one of the things when I'd be working in the garden would be watching big old fat bumblebees trying to get in to get to the nectar. And you can see them as they go down, bump, 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 to get to the bottom. Now, these next two plants are very tall growing. If you have something that you want to shade, you want to block the view, maybe it's a shed or a fence, and you want to cover it up, Joe Pye weed is one of your possibilities. Now, the book's listed as growing 4 to 7 feet in full sun, blooming July to September. That is the brick wall that's at the top of the hill in our botanical garden. And I have stood at the base of that plant and I can just get my hand over that top stone. And then above that, you've got this 3-foot balustrade. So I'm guessing these plants are growing 9 to 10 feet tall. They form a very dense mat. The flower clusters are domed and are quite numerous. They give you this kind of frothy air there. The flowers are pale pink. You will see these in the ditches along roads too. So let's go look at the next one. New York ironweed. Now this is one that definitely it behaves itself. It stays 4 to 7 feet. It's very reliable, comes back every year. It has a more open structure. The flowers are more individual, brilliant. This attractive deep purple color. It does tolerate dry conditions. It likes full sun. It will grow again in ditches, so we know it likes moist soil. So that's another consideration for a tall accent plant towards the back. So those are the possibilities I'm going to share with you today. A couple of notes. If you're thinking about getting into growing native plants, I do not recommend trying to grow the meadow seed clusters that you see a lot of nurseries carry. Those it takes a lot of work. It takes 4 years for your meadow to get set up, and you've got to mow for those first 3 years. You have to mow a lot to keep down the grasses and the weeds that are already there. And I think you'll find that you'll be weeding a lot if you try and grow one of those meadows. So where can you find these plants? We do have a couple of nurseries here in our area. Broken Arrow Nursery up in Hamden and Nature Works in North Ford. They carry potted plants of the natives. Now they're not exclusively natives, so you have to read the descriptions carefully. Another one that I've had good luck with is out from Minnesota called Prairie Moon Nursery. And they sell seeds and potted plants. Their URL is prairiemoon.com, easy to remember. And if you're starting with potted plants, the recommended arrangement that is to start with 3 to 5 small plants, so that as it grows, you get a nice, strong visual effect. So those are some of the possibilities. What I urge you to do would be to start experimenting. You don't have to, pull everything out and start from scratch with native plants. Stick them in here, stick them in there, and see what does well in your particular little environmental niche. What we found in the botanical garden would be things would pop up where we hadn't planted them. So we think they're telling us they like this better than where we put them. Self-seeders, some of them do spread through rhizomes. So, you know, have fun with it. Experiment, see what you can come up with. So thank you very much, and I wish you good luck. One warning is if you get into growing native plants, it becomes kind of addictive. You want to try, oh, let me try this one. Let me try that one. And these were only just scratching the surface of what's available. These are all things that are easy to start, usually don't require a lot of attention. The trout lily is the only one that may be a little bit difficult to get going. We've had limited success with it in the botanical garden. So I wish you all well, and thank you for listening. Oh, a bonus. This is a shrub, one of my favorite plants. Eastern sweet shrub, Calacanthus floridus. It grows 4 to 6 feet and in clumps, blooms May to June, sun to partial shade. The thing that is most attractive about this plant is that the petals on these flowers look like they were cut out of wood shavings. It's not a delicate, soft, moist flower that we're used to. It's very woody and it has a very sweet fragrance. So if you run across one of these, I strongly recommend trying it out. You will enjoy it. Okay, that's it.